to have here with us Ezio Manzini at Projekt Lab in University of Nîmes. We would like to take this opportunity to interview him about his work, in particular in the field of design for social innovation. My name is Michela Deni. I am a full professor of semiotics in University of Nîmes and director of Projekt Lab. Here next to me is my colleague Thomas Watkin. He's associate professor in urban design and sociology. So, Ezio, we decided to have an interview with you because we have been following your work for many years through your conference, some meetings, publication. And you have been a precursor, first in Italy and then worldwide, on the design for social innovation. Could you remind us of your path from your interest in sustainable design to service design and to social innovation to public policies through politics of the everyday and livable proximity?
Well, thank you for this question that starts from some personal story. So every biography is diverse. And my one, for what regard what I did in these 40 years now, is that the beginning of my story has been to be an activist in political issue and particularly at a certain point an environmental issue. And by profession, I was doing environmental issue dealing with the renewable resources. So this is what I did until a certain point. And afterwards, it happened to me to be invited to give a lecture at a place that's called Domus Academy, that at that point was the beginning of this very interesting initiative where there was all the main designer of the so-called design revolution in the 80s. And I discovered that design was very interesting because I was struggling on the idea how we can promote this idea of sustainability, and I found out that the design could help. So I am not a designer that discovered sustainability, but I am somebody that was involved in sustainability issue and discovered that design could help in making this transformation possible. And afterward, yes, in my biography, people can see that I started many different directions in design because I started working on materials, so somewhere design for materials, and afterward interactions, and afterward service, and all these different area of design has been, for me, a field to exploit. But I was not so interested personally on this service design, for instance, per se. I was interested if and how service design could be helpful to promote this transition towards sustainability. Because at the beginning, design was mainly on the product, and I was started thinking how the product could be done in a more environmental friendly way, as it was said at this moment. But afterward, and so I worked and I made some book on design for sustainable products. And also on materials, how materials can be more sustainable, the way in which we deal with them. But afterward, I had the impression that to deal only with material was not enough, and with the product was not enough, because in any case, the environmental problem and the unsustainability of our society was not only linked to the fact that the product per se were designed in the way that do not keep in account any environmental issue. And so I imagine, as many people with me, I was not alone, that we could shift in some way from product to services. Because we said, it was not true, but we said at that moment that the service was immaterial. So to move toward a dematerialization of our progress, maybe we thought it was possible to move from product to services, so we would have a more dematerialized society. And this is my motivation to develop service design, that afterward has its own story, not only related to environmental issue, but for me the beginning was for environmental issue. And afterward, we discovered that also the service are not immaterial, as we thought at the beginning, because the interaction per se is immaterial, but to keep the condition of having a service that happens, you need a lot of materials. And therefore, also this product-service system per se was not enough. And it was necessary to see some more strategic way to change the system. And therefore, I started to work on strategic design. And strategic design is now a discipline per se. But for me, at that moment, it was mainly how we can use strategic design, or what will become strategic design, as a way to change, to help the change into the society. And then you were saying social innovation. In this case, the difference is that design of material, interaction design, service design, strategic design are design disciplines. Design for social innovation is not a discipline. It's a change on where we look when we try to promote innovation. And everything started when me, my group, and many other people, not many at the moment, some people in the world, discovered there was people that was already doing something very interesting that we could see as a kind of prototype of a new way of living in a more sustainable way. So for us, the interest for this social innovation was having not only to say what we designers thought that could be a sustainable society, but having the possibility to say, look, there are people that are already doing something that is in the good direction. And therefore, we started to ask ourselves what design can do to help this process. And this is the beginning of design for social innovation. And afterward, we move from considering only the group of people, the kind of constellation of good examples of what could be done. But we started to say, look, but to change the overall society, you need to connect these dots, to have some image that emerge of which kind of society. And here we arrive to the political dimension of the choice that we do. And so there has been this kind of inquiry on the politics of the everyday. That is one of my book. And it's about how we can move from this interesting prototype, but separate one from the other one, towards something that's most near to a movement to change the reality as in at a larger scale. And finally, we discovered, or at least I discovered, for me was a discovery, that this kind of politics happens in the space. And so it was very important to consider how the kind of topology of what happens. So how the different people is in the space, and in which way this can influence the possibility to go on in this social innovation. And this is the topic of my last book on livable proximity. So in some way, this is the story. So at the end of the day, I am always a kind of activist for, now I would say, social, cultural, environmental sustainability. And this is the common thread of what I did. And to do it, I explored different fields in design.
Your book, Design When Everybody Designs, has tested in a certain way the diffusion of design attitude. We imagined that you didn't want to indicate a lack of specificity to design. With semiotic colleagues, we question not what is design, but when is it design. In other words, the condition of emergency or of design and of a design process. Could you specify your intention in Design When Everybody Designs, in which you propose to us a vision of the specificity of design and of being a designer?
Yeah, thank you. This has been really a moment of, for me at least, a clarification of some elements. I don't know if the book is helpful to clarify something for the others, but at least has been useful to clarify something in my mind. And the motivation was that I was participating and I still participate to discussion about something related to design, where different interlocutor had in mind a different interpretation of what is design. And this became really frustrating because it was impossible to arrive to any conclusion if what people has in mind when they talk about design was totally different. And the ambiguity has several motivations, and some of them we have to accept to live with ambiguity. But at the end of the day, I have the impression that there was a main misunderstanding that is between two different main interpretation of what is the design action. And in my word, one is to consider the human being have some capabilities, and in between the capabilities that they have, there is also the capability to design. So to consider design as, for instance, creativity as a gift for every human being. And in the same way that we say the creativity, every kid start the life with a certain degree of creativity, but afterwards something can happen in the life that promote or not the creativity. I think that everybody starts with a design capability that is a kind of a composition of a critical sense. So to have to start a design action, you have to, because design is to change the state of things, as Simon said, toward a state of things that we consider more positive. So the first point is to recognize in the reality something that you don't like. So you have to be critical. If you are not the criticism, you are not starting. The second thing, you have to have a certain degree of creativity that permit look into what do not work or you don't like, what can be done to make it different. No, how it can be in a different way. So this is creativity. And the third, that distinguish the designer as opposed, for instance, to some more artists, the traditional artists. The artists are not to justify why he's proposing a certain image, but we as designer, or the moment in which we design, not yet we designer, but whoever design, has to say this image could be viable because there are some leverage, because there are some driver, because there is some resources in the reality that can make it possible. So if you put together these three that are very normal human capabilities, this is the capability to design. And very often when we talk about design and design process, we are talking about this kind of diffuse design capability. Of course, if we live as we was in the past, in the what's called the traditional society, you don't need to use this capability so much. And therefore, the majority of the choice in life is not done with a design attitude, is done with the repetition of what has been the tradition. And by my point of view, to repeat the tradition is a very good choice when the tradition is giving you a good direction. But to give a good direction, it means the change in the historical change in the condition of life are very slow. So when for long period of history it was like this, there was, in my view, no particular problem to follow tradition, to do as we have always done, or to slightly implement, increase the quality of what we have done. And it's good like this, as all the craftsmanship has been during the history. When something else happened, when the rhythm of change accelerate and progressively invest all the area of the human living, and therefore the more and more people are facing the necessity to imagine something new, because the tradition is not giving anymore a good direction, simply because the conditions are changed so much. This is not me, this is Beck and Giddens that said already 30 years ago that one of the many definitions of modernity is the period in which people have to design their biography, because you cannot follow the tradition. And this necessity to design something started in industry, because the industry has been the special place in which this change happened most fast. And therefore there had been a misunderstanding that because in industry there was a desperate need to apply this design capability, because the industry per se was changing everything, so you had to redefine the whole system that has been generated by the industry. Some person emerged that was capable to make this kind of project. That means to find to use a new possibility given by technology and to give a meaning to what the technology and the science and technology was offering us. And we call them designers. And given that they appear with the industry, we'll call them industrial designers. And given that those industry was mainly for the mass production, we assumed, as it was in the first definition of design, that you had a design only when you had somebody designing for industry for the mass production. So at the beginning, the design was related only to this kind of products, but this only because this has been the beginning of the acceleration, and it was necessary to give, as the Bauhaus did, create a whole system of meaning that gave meaning to products that was generated with a new material and with a new technology. But if we move in the last century, we see that progressively the area that started to change so fast progressively increased, and the design, the need of a diffuse design, so normal people that have to design what to do, or some experts that intervene to help this process of design, moved from the product design, the mass product, to all the production, toward the services, toward every area of the human living. So now if you talk about, I don't know, welfare, you cannot avoid to talk about what we have to design, to redesign a welfare in a society that is changed so quickly. This is the motivation why at the same time everybody find themselves, as Beck was saying once 30 years ago and more, that you have to design your biography, so you cannot simply do what your society is waiting for you. And at the same time, there are the need of so many different expert designer working in different fields, as we see today. And this has been, for me, the design, when everybody designs, means if in the mature modernity, everybody is there to design their own biography, and the everybody means the individual or means the collective, but it could be an individual, it could be a city. So the city have not been designed normally. From a certain moment, they have been designed, or somebody thought that has to be designed something around the city. So if there is the need of designing the biography of the individual or the collective identity, individuals, somebody is needed to help this process. And this is why we have now expert designer working in so many different fields.
I would like to follow up on the questions of my colleague Michela Denis, and in particular on several themes. First of all, I would like to know more about your position on current and future urban planning practices. The book Livable Proximity opens up avenues for changing and living the city differently through proximity. What is the role of design today in changing and designing the city in a world of transition? And in what way can the designer, according to you, get involved in emerging practices of designing the city of tomorrow?
Thank you. Well, there are several questions, but they are referring to two different facets of the story. One is why we need what we call design in the city making. And the other one is why in this city making we think, at least I think, and maybe we share the idea that we should search for a kind of proximity that are not the same thing, because, well, I go step by step. To answer to the first question, we are very near to what I was saying with the previous answer to the question, when I said in a world that is accelerating, there are more and more areas in which some design intervention is needed by normal people or by expert designer, but something has to be designed. So if we now, instead of talking in general, talk about the city, and we know, and we knew since a long time, that the city is probably the more complex artifact that the human being has generated in their own history. But except for very few cities in the past that has been totally designed, but they are really very few. So we can discuss about this, but it's a totally peculiar conditions. The city were not designed as a whole. There was only somebody that had to intervene in the city. When they intervened, because maybe in some moment there was nobody really planning for the city. But if we stay in the modernity, at the beginning it appeared that to make a city you need a plan, to design, to draw the street, the infrastructure, and what is possible to represent in a plan, so the planning, and to fill this plan with some artifact. They are the building. And so talking about the city, you had the planners that generate how things have to be developed in space, in a horizontal plane, and afterward the architects that are the one that fill the space with some very special objects that are the buildings. And all the rest that make a city was assumed that it happened by itself. And therefore the story of the city was the story of how you generate these two main elements. But this was possible until, again, sorry if I repeat, the change was relatively slow. And therefore the way in which the city was built permitted to the part of the city that is the soft part of the city and the other infrastructure to adapt and to evolve in a quasi-natural way. And therefore was enough to make a little bit of planning and make some main buildings, and afterward the city grow in a not natural, because it's not natural, it's cultural in any case, but quasi-natural way, accelerating the rhythm and making the city even more complex. We discovered that the city is not done only by planners that plan something, and not only the architects that make the house, because, for instance, what is the role of communication? Nowadays, what is the role of the digital or the digital environment in generating the city? But could be, what is the role of the healthcare system in generating a city? What is the role of the schools and the education system in generating this? So we started to recognize that the city is done by many different networks of infrastructure and objects that all together generate something. And I use generate, not produce, as Latour says, because nobody can really know what. So the city is not produced by anybody. Emerge from so many different actions that all together create certain conditions that at the end is the actual city, that is both the physical one, that using Senate language is la ville, as opposed to the cité, that is the city done by the people. Well, the language started to change, and people is not talking about city planning, but city making. That is not totally correct for what I say. It should be city generating, but in any case, city making is the co-evolution of many different subsystems that all together generate the city. And given that each one of these elements that compose the city, somebody has to design it, we need a lot of different designers, because every component of this city has to be designed. And therefore, we can see the planner as the designer of the plans, and the architect the designer of the buildings. But we need the designer of the digital system, we need the designer of the very different services that we need. We need the designer of the communications that is done about the city, and so on and so forth. So it could be formally some professional designers that do it, or could be somebody else that do it. This is another story. But in any case, the making of the generation of the city is the result of the co-design of so many different people in many different moments, in many different layers of what will constitute the city. And this can happen in many different directions. So what you generate could be for the good or for the bad. It's not that in the moment that we discover that planning was not enough and architecture was not enough, but we need much more design of many different systems. This will bring to a sustainable, socially and environmentally sustainable city. It can bring to the larger speculation. It can bring to all the problems that we see in the city now that are the result of some planning that some planning of city making that we can like it or not, but it's city making. Somebody designed it. So the big intervention of the real estate in London is designed, and they change totally the face of London, and the transformation and at the end the killing of Venice. Maybe nobody really wanted to kill Venice, but it's the result of many choices that has been done that create a condition in which Venice is not, unfortunately, anymore a real city, but it's a kind of Disneyland around Venice. So I want to say that to move from the traditional idea of city planning toward the city making or city generation is not obviously in the good direction. It's quite obviously in the wrong direction. So if you want to move from this main trend that brings toward the killing of the cities for the way in which you have known it as a lively place, a hybrid, complex, toward some desertified touristic city, toward some desertified village for the rich, or toward, in some way, again, desertified favelas for the poor, because in some way there is a kind of specularity in between the rich in the gated village and the poor in the favelas, because it's to concentrate everybody in certain place, everybody that are similar in certain place. We have to choose to go against this trend that is socially and environmentally unsustainable, and to move in the other direction. We can give different names. For me, I arrived to imagine that this idea to rebuild proximity intended as to create proximity system that are sufficiently dense and diversified, where different people can live together. And given that for me, not only for me, luckily the city, the core of the city, the capability to keep together people that are very diverse. So we have to work for creating condition for this diversity, and the condition for this diversity is a new idea of proximity, having the possibility to have nearby many people doing different things. And this is where we arrive. So we arrive that we have to work for the city making that ask for all the possible different way of being designer for me, but at the same time not only to be designer and maybe working for the real estate transformation of the city, but to be a designer that works for a city of proximity, to use my language, or in any case, a sustainable city, if we want to be more generic.
Finally, the same book, Livable Proximity, The Notion of Care, is appropriate for you to define proximities in a world of risk and conflicts. How does care enrich social innovation and the role of the designer in this context?
Also for this question, I like to separate two moments. One is what is a link, if there is a link, in between imagine a sustainable city, imagine a city of care, imagine a city of proximity. And I tell the story for myself, but I think that this is a journey that has been done with different moments, but in parallel by many people. So I talk for myself, but I'm sure that is not only my opinion, it's an opinion that is shared by many people, that you cannot talk about sustainability if you do not reconsider the issue and the attitude that we can define as care. So care is one pillar, the main pillar probably, in the way in which we consider our position in relation in between the human being, so the care, the exchange of care in between the people, and also in relation to the environment. And I am sure that it's not enough to say care to solve all the problems that we are facing in this moment, but is available the contrary. So we cannot imagine any sustainable society that do not recreate condition of care. Both care in between people, and already many years ago somebody wrote a book called The Careless Society, the society in which we live. And the Careless Society, who wrote this book, was a person named McKnight. He was telling that it was the service society that became the Careless Society, because the traditional service, not the one that I try to deal with, a collaborative service, but the traditional service formalizing the interactions create a distance. And therefore, you are not really caring, you are delivering a service that is not caring. So the movement toward breaking the community, breaking the commons, generating needs on one side and the service on the other side, was seen as a society without care. And I will say also for the environment, I think that many people agree that we can summarize our attitude toward the environment and the disaster that we are generating on the environment, the fact that we are not caring anymore for the quality of our environment. So it's not enough to say we have to care each other and we have to care for the environment, but if we don't say that, there is no other solution that we can have. So there are a lot of other points that have to be introduced, but this should be a kind of basic. So at a certain moment, many people, including myself, arrived to rediscover or discover for the first time the central role of the concept of care in whatever transition we can imagine toward whatever possible sustainable society. Because there will be many, hopefully, many different sustainable society, but they should have care in common. And then it happens something, and this is probably more me than others, so I will not say that it's shared by so many people, but we will see. I discovered, or I thought, what has been very well expressed by some researcher on the notion of care, and I always quote Puig de la Bella Casa and this book, Matter of Care, in which he said, look, care is mainly a tactile interaction. So you cannot have care if you don't have the bodies that are in contact with the other one. And it's typically a interaction, because you can see without being seen, or you can hear without being heard, but you cannot touch without being touched. So it's really the core of a real interaction. So if we think today that there is no sustainable society if we have not care, and care is based on this deep interaction, also physical interaction, it introduces the issue, where are our body in the story? And where are our body? What is the topology of what we are talking about? To have care, it means that our bodies have to be in touch, one with the other ones, and we with our physical environment. So in a period in which it appeared that everything was done to forget where is your body, because you can do everything wherever you are, independently for where is your body, this reintroduce the notion that where you are with your body is fundamental. So there is, I say now, I don't know how many people share what I'm going to say now, but there is no sustainable society, both environmentally and socially, without the fact that people re-find themselves in the space and in the contact. This do not mean that we spend part of our life also in the digital space, but it means that, and this is really a kind of fork in between two different directions, if the digital space is bringing us the more and more in the digital space, in some way saying, forget your body, forget this physical world because it's dirty, it's dangerous, it's unsecure, etc., please enter in our fantastic digital space where everything is so nice and you can have all the best relationships, etc., etc. So there is this very strong dystopic, for me, scenario that is very attractive, and there are people putting a lot of money on it. And we should say, no, we should use this, also the digital technology, to help people that in this moment maybe they cannot meet each other, to meet in the digital space, but use the digital space to reorganize ourselves in the physical one. So the digital as a tool to help each other to meet, and also to meet in between human beings, and to meet again with the environment, with the animals, with whatever participate to the network of life. So this is what brings to the discussion of proximity, because sustainability asks for care, and care asks for proximity, and this is the link in between them. Afterward, once if you agree, I think that now everybody agree on the issue of care, and so we should design for care. So what does it mean to design for care? And today my proposal, and maybe this is not shared by everybody, is if you really want to design for care, you have to design for proximity, because you cannot have proximity, you cannot have care without proximity. And proximity, where care is difficult to say, I like this issue about proximity, because if you stay on design for care, strictly speaking, you cannot design care. And therefore, we are in a kind of loop. So we say that sustainability means care. Care is what we shall propose, but we cannot really design directly care, because care is empathy, is human beings that trust each other, and so this cannot be designed. Luckily, this is choices that people do. But if you consider the care as for proximity, proximity has a component that can be designed. So we can design for the part of the proximity that is related to what we can do together to generate the condition in which you can also have care, not only in physical terms, but also in the term of the quality of the human interaction. So moving from design for care toward designing to proximity, we have immediately many different line of actions that we can do to generate the condition for proximity.
Thank you very much, Ezio Manzini, for sharing with us here at the University of Nîmes your ideas and the way to understand design in this large topic of social innovation and also livable proximity. Thank you also.